Hi, this is Erica, Vixen, Gavin, coming to you on TV Confidential.
But I really hope you enjoy our show today. We have a nice show here with Francis Langford, Jerry Colonna, Tony Romano, Patty Thomas, and Barney Dean. I know you'll enjoy the girls. You remember girls? Yes, sir, they're doing very fine. In some of these islands we visit, these girls have been the first to land. Won't Eleanor be mad?
Ed Robertson, thank you once again for making TV Confidential part of your Memorial Day weekend celebration. Later on in the hour, we'll bring you an encore presentation of our conversation with Martha Bolton. Martha Bolton, the first and only female writer Bob Hope hired. In the meantime, and speaking of Bob Hope, Tim Gray is on the line with us. Tim is the producer and director of Miles, Morale, and Memories, Bob Hope and World War II, new documentary about Bob Hope and his personal involvement entertaining the troops of World War II. The documentary is narrated by Gary Sinise. It features Linda Hope, Bob Hope's daughter, Joe Colonna, grandson of Jerry Colonna, Bob Hope's aide-de-camp during his World War II shows. Many World War II historians, many first-hand memories of World War II veterans, as Tim just alluded, plus some of the many letters written to Bob Hope by our servicemen and women and or their families. Miles, Morale, and Memories, Bob Hope and World War II, scheduled to air on 315 PBS stations throughout the month of May. Check your local listings. You can also enjoy it on demand at pbs.org or by downloading the PBS app. For more on the World War II Foundation, wwiifoundation.org. For more on the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation and the Bob Hope Legacy, bobhope.org. By the way, if you have not already done so, folks, get a copy of Dear Bob, Bob Hope's wartime correspondence with the GIs of World War II by Linda Hope, along with Martha Bolton, published by University Press of Mississippi. Tim's documentary is a marvelous companion to Linda's book about Bob Hope's wartime experience. Many of the, there's a lot to cover in 55 minutes, and you do a marvelous job of hitting all the high notes. But towards the second half of the film, you pick a few of the letters that really kind of jumped out, both for you and for Linda and for Bob's secretary at the time. And the stories behind those letters are often very moving. That's why I want people to get a copy of the book as well, because your documentary and Linda's book really go hand in hand.
Yeah, Bob Hope was receiving about 38,000 letters a week at his office in Toluca Lake, California. And his secretary, Marjorie Hughes, picked out some of the more poignant ones. And some were really funny, and some were just absolutely horrific, and others were just so sorrowful. You know, it was just a microcosm of what men and women were going through during the war. And those letters we picked the best of the best, we thought, that represented different parts of the letters that he got, included those in the film. But the book by Linda and Martha is just absolutely incredible.
Your documentary also spotlights all of the members of Bob Hope's USO troop, including Tony Romano, his guitarist, and as we mentioned before, Jerry Colonna, his aide-de-camp.
Yes, and Francis Langford and Patty Thomas, who are the beautiful young entertainers, singers. I think the men were more excited to see those two than maybe even Jerry and Bob at the time. You know, and so he put together an hour-long, 45-minute-long vaudeville show for these men and women all over the world, and everybody just gravitated towards Bob Hope. It's almost like Gary Sinise today. Gary's carrying on Bob's legacy. Everybody gravitates towards Gary Sinise the same way they gravitated towards Bob, and Gary's performing all over the world for our troops now with his Lieutenant Dan band, and you'll see him in the Memorial Day concert, or you did see him at the concert in Washington, and so he's doing a lot. He picked up the torch, and he's definitely carrying it.
Gary Sinise narrates Miles, Morale, and Memories, Bob Hope, and World War II. scheduled to air across the country on PBS stations. Check your local listings. You can also enjoy it on demand, pbs.org, or by downloading the PBS app. Now, Gary Sinise is a no-brainer to narrate a movie like your Bob Hope documentary. Tim, was it easy to get him? I mean, I know that you fostered relationships with a lot of celebrities who have collaborated and lent their voices to many of your documentaries.
It wasn't. Gary was in from the get-go, and he's narrated, I think, 4 or 5 of our films now. He's just very patriotic and really enjoys that time period. I was just with him earlier this month when we went down to New Orleans. His Gary Sinise Foundation took 16 World War II veterans down to New Orleans to visit the museum there. And it was just one of the aspects of what Gary does. He just really wants to recognize the military and everything that they've done for us and the people. And so if there's a modern-day Bob Hope, it's Gary Sinise.
Not to get too political, but there was a...
good.
Well, no, I mean, I market my show as 2 hours away from politics and current affairs.
Oh, good. I like to hear that.
Yeah, but that being said, there are several points in Miles, Morale, and Memories, Tim, where I stopped and I realized there was a true unifying spirit of patriotism that enveloped the entire country during the World War II years, especially once the U.S. got involved, except for the 2 or 3 week period after 9/11. We haven't seen anything like that ever since.
Yeah, it's because that war was so clear. And there are certain things you have to remember about World War II. The big one was that on December 6th, 1941, about 85% to 88% of America did not want to go to war and help out England, which was now standing alone against Germany and Italy. And so, on December 6th, the great majority of the United States did not want to get involved in another world war. Then December 7th happened, and the whole script flipped. And it became such a patriotic time where we were attacked. And it was like 9/11. America really gets its back up when we're attacked. And that was the case then, and that was the case after what happened in New York City and Washington and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and everything associated with that. So it was very clear-cut who was right, who was wrong, who wore the black hat, who wore the white hat during World War II. And everything's been diluted since then. It got diluted in Korea and Vietnam and the Gulf War. It's like, okay, who are our enemies? Why are we fighting? Our enemies became almost, you didn't know who your enemy was. In World War II, you knew the Germans by their helmets. You knew the Germans or the Japanese by their helmets, and it was very easy to spot who the enemy was. And since then, the wars have not been as clearly defined. So, that's just the way it is. But you're correct that those few days after 9/11, when everyone in Washington were on, they were on the Capitol steps and they were singing together as Republicans and Democrats, and we were united. Don't you just wish we could do that all the time to solve a problem? It's almost like, let's get united to solve cancer. Let's get united to solve autism. Let's get united to solve veteran homelessness. America has that capability. We saw it during World War II. It's just that the challenges have been different ever since then.
Tim Gray is the director and producer of Miles, Morale, and Memories, Bob Hope, and World War II, scheduled to air on PBS stations across the country over the next few weeks. Check your local listings. You can also enjoy it on demand at pbs.org or by downloading the PBS app. For more on the World War II Foundation, WWII Foundation.org. For more on the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation and the Bob Hope Legacy, bobhope.org.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item: if you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
Hi, this is Melissa Manchester, and you lucky people, are listening to TV Confidential.
Howdy do, fellas. This is Bob. Command Performance Hope, telling each Nazi that's in Russia today that Crimea doesn't pay. I'm now getting my material from H.V. Kaltenborn. Well, I'm a little tired tonight. I just got back from Camp Roberts, drove down 200 miles in a Jeep. Tomorrow I get the Order of the Purple Callus.
Let's do a little Bob Hope by the numbers. At one point early on, first few months, first year or so, at one point he did like 60 benefit shows over an 8-day period. That's like 7-8 shows a day. And this was during his free time when he's still doing a weekly radio show and making movies. He was like the Energizer Bunny, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it was just incredible because you think back then, he's a top 10 movie star. He's the #1 rated radio star. So, and he's doing these camp shows while still doing his radio show, while still making movies with Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour and others. And it's just incredible the pace he was on. And when you talk about the numbers, their travel troop did 80,000 miles in World War II. So you're traveling 80,000 miles in propeller planes over the Pacific, over Europe, to Australia, planes that have to refuel every couple of hours, planes that were not pressurized, planes that could fly at a certain altitude only. So this was not the jet age. This was the propeller age, and they did 80,000 miles from basically the beginning of 1942 into 1945 to the September of 1945. So that's incredible, and people today can't comprehend that because it doesn't sound like a lot, when you're taking a 777 somewhere or some huge plane or whatever it is. So to me, that was just amazing, and there were no luxuries on those planes either. So you really had to want to go to North Africa or go to Guadalcanal or go to, Germany or Sydney, Australia. Just absolutely incredible.
And going back to Francis Langford and Patty Thomas, these were planes that were not designed for female passengers, certainly not designed for female passengers on a long flight to parts unknown. And so the fact that they were all in, that speaks a lot to their characters. Yeah,
I mean, they're girls, they're 19, 20 years old, they're very young, but they're in. They're in with Bob and Tony and Jerry and whoever else might be on the trip, and they're all packed in with the cargo on these planes. They're traveling with, cargo on C-47s to places, and they always saw what the payoff was not fame. The payoff was not money. The payoff was to see a Marine smile on the island of Pavuvu in the Pacific, knowing the next day he was probably, going to be wounded or killed on the island of Peleliu. To give that Marine that respite, and that was their payoff, to make them laugh and smile and dance on stage. So, and they would get a lot of letters from parents saying, "Thank you for giving my son that time. He was killed 2 days later. We just are so happy that you were there to entertain him on the final days of his life." That is an impactful letter.
Miles Morale and Memories, new documentary about Bob Hope by our guest Tim Gray, scheduled to air on 315 PBS stations across the country over the next few weeks. Check your local listings. You can also enjoy it on demand, pbs.org, or by downloading the PBS apt. Now, one of the points you mentioned in Miles Morale and Memories, Tim, is that while the template for Hope's military show more or less was the same, no matter where he went, he would tailor it in many cases, particularly if he was doing it on the front line, or when he would he and the troops would visit our wounded soldiers at a military hospital.
He would do a lot of research before he got to a place to find out what the local watering holes were. You know, what are the names of the local bars? Who's the commanding general? Who's the commanding officer? You know, where are they from? So he could poke fun at them in front of the troops. And the generals all loved it. It was not malicious or anything. But he just didn't show up at a place. He would do that typical vaudeville act that lasted about 45 minutes. But he would cater it to wherever he was in North Africa, Europe, or the Pacific, and he would find out the names of local famous people and work them into the act or things like that. So he really tailored it to wherever he was in the world, and that really endeared him to the troops that he entertained.
We mentioned before you've got archival footage of Hope and Jerry Colonna and Francis Langford and the rest of his troop often performing in military hospitals. This was one of those moments that clicked for me, Tim. Hope was living the horrors of MASH 30 years before MASH ever existed.
Yeah, a few years anyway. Yeah, he was. And he always told the troop before he went in there, Ed, he said, no matter what you see, you have to go in with a smile, and you have to entertain these men and sometimes women who were there. So he always prepped them, no matter what you saw and what you experienced. Keep smiling, and know that you're there to entertain these men. You're not there to make them feel worse about their situation. And that's what they did. They went in with guitars. They went in for these private visits to the hospitals, and they would entertain the men. And it would just, some of the men, they didn't know whether it was working or not because they were in such bad shape. Well, could they hear us? Are we doing more harm than good? They didn't know, but they still entertained the masses on a hospital ward or somewhere up there. So, yeah, it was amazing.
One thing I didn't know, I learned this from watching Miles Morale and Memories, Bob Hope in World War II, your new documentary, Tim, is that in many cases, during his brief time at home, during his brief downtime with his family, Hope would often rehearse his monologues in front of Dolores.
Yeah, and the kids.
Yeah.
Linda was 6 years old at the time. It was mostly for Dolores because Dolores would give him a thumbs up or thumbs down. She had a great sense of humor, so she would tell him if something worked or didn't. So the kids, Linda and her brother, were the beneficiaries of getting the routine before it appeared on radio or in the movies or at some base somewhere in the world. And Dolores would be, give them the feedback. She wouldn't hold back. She would say, that works, that doesn't work. So, they got to have dinner with him because he was always coming and going. That was a special time when he was home, but they also got to take part in what he was practicing and rehearsing. And Linda, being 6, really didn't know what war was all about.
Yeah.
And her mother had to explain that Daddy's going off because he has a gift to entertain people, and some of those people that he's going to entertain are never going to come home. And for a 6-year-old, that's pretty heavy, but Dolores had to explain something because they were just watching him on planes all the time, whether he was coming or going. So.
Yeah, that's a lot for any 6-year-old kid to absorb, but especially during that period. I mean, that's a lot for any kid to ask.
Yeah, I agree. And it had to be explained in a certain way by a mother who understood that her husband was born to do something like this and that she had to let him go and that he would be in harm's way much of the time while he was outside of the United States.
One of the most moving moments for me watching Miles Morale and Memories, Tim, came near the end. I don't remember who said it. I believe it was one of the historians you talked to for the film. But that historian said, Hope did this. Hope made this sacrifice. Hope put his life on the line simply because he loved his adopted country so much and the opportunities it gave him.
Mm-hmm. Made him a star. I mean, he was born in England and immigrated with his family to Cleveland. He got into vaudeville, and then he got into the theater, Broadway, and then the radio. So he owed a lot to the United States. He became an American citizen. He wanted to fight in World War II, but President Roosevelt said, you and people like Bing Crosby and Humphrey Bogart and Mickey Rooney, you're better off doing what you do best, that's entertain the troops. And a lot of Hollywood did go and fight. Jimmy Stewart was a B-24 pilot. Clark Gable served in the 8th Air Force. A lot of Hollywood people, they all had different roles during the war, and Bob Hope wanted to do something to contribute to victory for his adopted country, and he was very patriotic and glad to be an American citizen.
What are you working on next, Tim?
We're working on a story in a place most Americans have never heard of. It's called Bletchley Park, and Bletchley Park was a place in England where the Allies broke the German Enigma code, their secret military code during World War II, and it probably saved about 14 million lives and prevented the war from going on another few years. So that is going to be narrated by Keith Morrison from Dateline. And so we're working on that next and a few other things, but we're really excited about the Bob Hope film, and I've learned so much about him and his family. It's just, he was the first stand-up comedian. So all the people today, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, David Letterman, Johnny Carson, John Mulaney, all the comedians today, stand-up comedians today, owe gratitude, choked on my words, to Bob Hope for what he did, because he was the first stand-up comedian.
Miles, Morale, and Memories, Bob Hope, and World War II, scheduled to air on 315 PBS stations over the next few weeks. Check your local listings. You can also enjoy it on demand, pbs.org, or by downloading the PBS app. For more on Tim Gray and the World War II Foundation, wwiifoundation.org. For more on on the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation and the Bob Hope Legacy, bobhope.org. Tim Gray, thank you so much for joining us.
Ed, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Really a lot of fun.